When I was 14, I learned how to scuba dive. Now, I'm a person that grew up in Arizona, landlocked, dry state. But I put a big tank on my back, I put a regulator in my mouth, and I dove into the ocean. And I took a big breath of oxygen underwater. And whoa, blew my world. Some people look up to space and want to explore infinity and beyond, but for me, I looked out to sea. And I spent my life then working to protect the oceans. So I helped to reduce plastic pollution, and I helped put a marine sanctuary and a park in place. And I even worked for a startup that we made products from algae for food and materials. And what I learned with all that work on the ocean is that more than 3 billion people rely on the oceans every day for their food, every day, and their livelihoods. Those are fisher people in Indonesia and India and Ghana. These are carp farmers in China and Thailand. These are people fishing in lakes in Kenya for perch. And the thing is that the planet is covered by 71% of our planet is covered by the ocean and waters. And the oceans actually produce half of all the oxygen on Earth. So it's so important for regulating our climate systems, but also our food systems. And so what I'm going to talk about today is how do we protect our oceans while we produce from the oceans. And on land, we can continue to make our food on land, but it continues to put pressure on those forests, and we're losing prairies and plains and biodiversity. Why not the ocean? It's our biggest food bank. So, what's the current state of the oceans? Well, they're in danger, as you might imagine. They're getting warmer and stormier. They're getting higher. They're getting more acidic, less oxygen, less resilient. So, why are they getting warmer? Well, 93% of all the excess heat caused by greenhouse gas emissions is being sunk into the ocean. That means it's expanding and rising. It means it gets stormier. And the way we see it is like last month when all that storm surge hit our coasts and we saw highways starting to dissipate and a lot of coastal erosion. But it's also getting more acidic. And what that means is 30% of the carbon dioxide that has already been emitted since the Industrial Revolution is being absorbed by the oceans. So that means the pH is dropping and the acidity is rising. That's for you, chemistry and bio folks. I see you. So more acidic, more warm oceans is actually having a lot of stress on the very base of our food systems and the food web that supports all of the animals and food in the ocean. So we need to think about how we can protect and produce from the ocean. And we know that 3 billion people rely on the ocean, and if we're really stressing our food systems, we know there's a growing population, and those people are relying on that, and the ocean's not going to be able to deliver it. So we need to be using our ocean resources wisely, not using them up. So what if we could start turning the tide? Get it? What if we could start restoring our oceans? So there's really great examples, real-life examples, research, that if we give the ocean a little bit of a break, it can usually bounce back. So I'm going to talk about my favorite example, which I'm sure you can guess what it is, which is seaweed. So many of you may have walked on the beaches at Pescadero or Monterey, Santa Cruz, and you see seaweed wash up on the beaches. Sometimes it's still slimy and wet, sometimes it's dried, sometimes it's really stinky. But there are thousands of species of seaweed in the world. But the kind that grow off here, off the coast of California, are these giant kelp. They can grow more than a foot a day, and they grow together in these underwater forests. These underwater forests around the world actually are almost as big as the Amazon, and they absorb carbon dioxide like trees on land. And these ocean forests are super important for all kinds of reasons. First of all, they're great habitat for animals. They're a breeding ground for fisheries, shelter for those cute sea otters and sea lions. That's where you can find sea stars and sand dollars and snails and anything else that starts with S. But that's what we can find in these kelp forests. They're also really good at protecting our coast from all that wave action we were talking about before. By having those forests next to our coast, they dissipate all that wave energy, so we can protect our coasts better. But also, they're really good at cleaning up the ocean and absorbing all those extra nutrients that can run off from agriculture waste. Anything that pollution comes from the land, they can absorb phosphorus and nitrogen. And again, remember, they absorb carbon dioxide to help moderate climate change. So for all these things that they can do, they're really important for our food system. And what we need to do looking forward is think about how do we restore them? How can we use seaweed as a future for our economy, for our environment? And I'm going to tell you a few stories about how seaweed can be used to restore both the environment and people's jobs. All right. Well, first of all, we have to talk about what seaweed can do for us as well. So it did all those things for the environment, but for us, it's actually good food. Seaweed is actually often called a sea vegetable. It's got the same minerals and vitamins as regular vegetables, and people in Japan and Korea and China have been eating seaweed for generations, and they farm seaweed. They make red species and brown and green species of different kinds of seaweed. And in the US, we're just learning how to use more seaweed in our lives. So here you can see, ever seen a kelp burger? I know you probably have seaweed on your sushi. We're seeing kelp chips, kelp kimchi. So we're also seeing other uses besides how kelp can feed the world. It can also be for materials. So I held those plastic packages you see that look like they're plastic. They're actually made from seaweed. So we're replacing plastic packaging, or what's coming from fossil fuels, with seaweed packaging. We're looking at new textiles. Think about, you could be wearing seaweed clothing in the next decade or so. So all these good applications we're learning that we can use for food and we can use for clothing and materials. So, like I said, we're going to talk about two really cool case studies on what restoration can look like in action with seaweed. This is a bull kelp. Bull kelp also grows in ocean forests, and they're actually off the northern coast of California all the way up to Canada. And the thing about these bull kelp, like other forests around the world, they've been disappearing about 4 times faster than the rainforest. So the story here in California is these bull kelp are kept in check, because remember, kelp can grow more than a foot a day. And these are kept in check by sea urchins. Sea urchins like to eat bull kelp. And then the sea urchins are kept in check by sunflower, sea stars, and sea otters. They like to eat sea urchins. Well, in 2014, those sea stars disappeared. And scientists think it was because of a sunflower sea star wasting disease. They were gone. At the same time, the water all of a sudden had this warm event, and bull kelp really like cold water with lots of nutrients. Well, the water all of a sudden got warm, so they were less healthy. The combination of warmer water and the sea urchin and the sea star being gone, well, as you can imagine, the sea urchins had a field day. They had an all-you-can-eat buffet, and they went after that kelp, and they ate all the fronds, the stems, and even the holdfasts that are at the bottom of the sea floor. And this is what happened. This is what it looked like. the kelp were gone. And these are called sea urchin barrens. So a startup company had an idea. They were looking to think about how could they restore kelp forests, but also make more food for the world. They hired divers and fisher people to go down and collect hundreds and hundreds of these sea urchins and brought them back to a facility on land. And on land in that facility, they started feeding the sea urchins some plant-based diet, which they like. And about 6 weeks later, they were full of urchin roe, or eggs. It's called uni. Uni is a delicacy for foodies around the world, especially in Japan, here in California. After 6 weeks, they were able to create a food product to sell to the world. And guess what happened in the ocean where those sea urchins had been taken out? Juvenile kelp reestablished on the sea floor. And like I said, they grow a foot a day. Those kelp forests have started to return. Pretty cool, huh? All right, I'm going to tell you a second story, but this is about restoration of economies and jobs. So how many of you have had a lobster? Lobster, do you like lobster? Oh, you guys, that's pretty good. Do people know where lobsters come from? Mostly Maine. Oh, good, yeah, okay. So Maine and lobsters, we all think about the whole history and cultural identity of Maine is about lobsters. And lobster fishermen there have been fishing for generations. Well, with climate change, the waters off the northern part of Maine got warmer. So the lobsters started to migrate north. Well, the fishermen now only had they only could fish 6 months of the year where they normally would be fishing all year round. Only 6 months of the year, they didn't have a job for the second half of the year. What were they going to do? Seaweed. They became seaweed farmers. And the nice thing about being a seaweed farmer, there's no inputs, no chemicals, no fertilizers, no fresh water. You don't even need to own any land. So these seaweed farmers now are farming 6 months of the year and selling product to the very products you just saw on the slides a few slides ago. And this kind of farming is happening around the US. In Alaska, the same thing's happening. Those fishermen are also starting to farm seaweed. And we're seeing off the coast of California, we're seeing more of it. In fact, it's estimated that we will be farming more seaweed than potatoes by 2051. Think kelp chip, not potato chip. So those are two examples of how seaweed and innovation, private sector, fishermen, everybody gets involved in restoring our oceans. This is what a regenerative economy looks like. When we do activity that regenerates our resources and doesn't extract. And this is where ocean production and ocean protection go in hand to reestablish and restore our food systems in the water. And you know what? Every day, you can actually make the same impact with what you choose to eat. You can choose that kelp chip instead of a potato chip. You can choose fish jerky instead of beef jerky. Every single day, you can make an impact just by what you eat and what you snack on. And your professions too, whatever you decide you want to be when you get older, it can be an artist, a chef, a linguist, a water farmer, a kelp farmer, a doctor, a lawyer. All of these are part of the regenerative economy. And when I was 14, I followed my passion. I went on to study marine biology and helped to establish the marine sanctuary that's off of Monterey Bay. And that's been there. Oh, thank you. That's been there for a long time now, and it's really helped to restore the fisheries and all the animal life that's off in that Monterey Bay. And so I challenge all of you to think big, to dream big, 71% of the planet big. The oceans and the waters, come help us. Thank you.